Hello, and welcome back to the How to Write a Book podcast. It is lovely to be back. I am so sorry for the delay that we have had. A lot of people don't know this yet, but I am trying to be as transparent as I can. I have been on a sabbatical for about 2 months now. So I actually left my role in production coordination so that I could make some space for other like events and moments that were needed inside my world. And it was a good choice for me because I just had to really, kind of separate myself from the working environment. And I'm really glad that I did because now I'm back, I'm refreshed, which is that's something I didn't realize I needed a lot of rest. And now we are getting back into the swing of things. So that's why this episode is coming to you late. And for anyone who might be like, oh my gosh, well, now you're like behind an episode. Are you going to be missing an episode? I got you. No worries. We're going to still be publishing the same number of episodes this month. It just might come one right after another. So hopefully you're ready for your weekly dose of the How to Write a Book podcast. One of the things you're going to notice is that we have a new outro. I've also been improving the pipeline for the podcast. So I've been experimenting with new platforms. It's been great. Actually, I found a really cool platform. I won't share the name yet, even though it's a popular one, but I love it so far. Like it's pretty easy. So hopefully you all will notice the seamless sound quality even better now. So that being said, why don't we just go ahead and jump into this interview and then we'll follow with more updates in the coming episodes. So in this episode, we are interviewing Jeanne Blasberg, who is the author of 3 novels. She lives in Utah, and I just love her journey. Love the way that she covers the biblical stories that are set in modern times. And of course, something that I have grown to love, which is the importance of feedback from writing groups. Also, we'll get to hear about her publishing journey with She Writes Press, which is a hybrid publisher that I've heard some great things about, and the blending of her personal experiences into her writing. So I hope that you love this episode as much as I do, and let's dive in.
Welcome to the How to Write a Book podcast, the show that helps you plan, write, and publish your book, even if you're a beginner or just feel like one. Now, for your host, she's written over a dozen books and helps others bring their books to life. Here she is, Massiel. And welcome back to the How to Write a Book podcast. Hello, Jeanne Blasberg. How are you doing today?
Hi, Massiel. I'm doing really well. So happy to be here.
Oh, good. And where are you calling us from?
I'm actually in Park City, Utah right now. In a few days, I'll be driving to Verona, Wisconsin. It's farming season, and I have some responsibilities there on a farm.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah, when I'm not writing, right? So,
Yes. That's very active. If you're like more sedentary, then it's all right. Now you're gonna go farm. That's awesome. I love that.
yeah,
All right.
I say growing lettuce is a little bit easier than writing novels.
I'm gonna write that down. That sounds like that's a really good tagline. Thank you so much, Judy, for joining us today. I'm really excited to get into your books. I think you have very cool, maybe retellings, possibly historical aspects. You're the author of Daughter of a Promise, which is a modern retelling of the biblical love story of David and Bathsheba. And this is your third novel. I'm This sounds super cool. Why don't you tell us what your books are about and your latest book?
Okay, I'd love to. So, Daughter of a Promise, my latest book, as you said, is a retelling, but it's not one of these retellings that's set in ancient times. I've actually taken this love story and made it contemporary. My timeline is 2019, 2020, and young Betsabe Ruiz is a college grad starting her first job in New York City in an investment banking training program. And I was inspired to do this because I studied this ancient story in the Bible, and everything about it felt so modern to me. It's really always been a story about consent and whether there was consent in this liaison or not. And in my eye, or it's just been debated whether or not there was. There's just that gray area I was really interested in exploring in a relationship. And also in the Bible, the whole story is told with regard to its impact on David. So I wanted to write a story in the first person from the female point of view. I wanted to give Bathsheba or Betsabe in my case a point of view and have this entire story told so that you're in her head, know what her feelings and reactions were. So those were some of the reasons. I can get into why I really love retellings, but that could be a topic for a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Um, so my first novel was published in 2017 and it was called Eden, also a biblical reference, although it doesn't parallel a story in the same way that Daughter of a Promise does. It really Eden is a exploration or a kind of reflection on what is paradise. And again, I've created this contemporary scene in the year 2000 in a summer home in this very waspy, privileged enclave in Rhode Island, where generations of a family have spent their summers in this home called Eden. And a long lost relative shows up, and financial burdens are hitting them from all sides. And so I took a week in the year 2000 and interwove the happenings of that week with the 100-year history of this family. So I did get categorized a little bit as a historical fiction writer, which I love. And I didn't really set out to write historical fiction, but that book got a lot of kudos for its historical settings. And then my second novel came out a few years after Eden, and again, I was inspired by this story in the book of Samuel where Hannah is barren and she feels very insecure as a woman. We're always judged by our fertility in one way or another, I think. And she really wanted a child and goes to the temple and prays for a son and bargains with God that if she were ever to become pregnant with a son and bear this child, she would turn him over to the temple as soon as he was weaned. And so I took that moment of turning over a child to the world at a very young age and turned it into a contemporary story of a mother sending her son to a very fancy boarding school where all sorts of shenanigans take place. She thinks this headmaster will open all sorts of doors for her son and treats him like the priest of a temple. But scandal ensues and disappointment. And really, it's the story of this mother son relationship and the evolution it goes through while young Sam is out in the world trying to both make his mother as proud as he can, but also just get on with his life. The other thing about all my novels, even though they allude to the biblical stories to different degrees, I my main character in Daughter of a Promise, Betsabe, her roommate is Ray Stern, and Ray Stern was a little baby born at the end of Eden. People who read my books get a little wink from me, a little Easter egg of getting to revisit some old characters, revisit some old settings, and I really have fun expanding my imaginary world in that way.
Oh, that's cool. I love that. I love when certain stories just small thread to the next one. Love
Yeah.
that. Can you remind me? I wanted to look it up, but then I thought I should ask during the call because I'm sure other people are also wondering. So, what was the story between David and Bathsheba
Okay.
again? Yeah.
Very good question, and it's 2 paragraphs in the, Bible, so I can synopsize it pretty easily. David is the very powerful king of Israel, however, he's on the descent. He had all you mentioned earlier, or maybe David and Goliath, or all his, like, very famous tales of his fortitude and strength happened way earlier. Now he's this older king and he doesn't go to battle any longer. He rules from his throne. But he's up on his roof one day and he sees a young woman bathing. And it's unclear whether he's a peeping Tom or whether she's bathing in his eyesight on purpose. But he admires her and asks about her, and his servants say, "Oh, she's Bathsheba, daughter of so and so, wife of so and so." Turns out his one of his generals is married to this woman. But nonetheless, he calls for her, and the line in the Bible is they lay together, and she conceived a child, and she sent word back to him, "I am pregnant." This is all from his point of view. You don't get to know what's in her head at all. Well, this is scandal for the king because he's now gotten a married woman pregnant, and being an adulteress, she would be stoned to death in those times too. So he's got a real situation on his hands. He calls her husband back from the front, back from war, and he says to him, "Why don't you go sleep with your wife? Bet you miss her. Why don't you go home and stay with your wife?" And this general says, "I'm on duty and I have men in the field and I will not consort with my wife while I am on duty." And so then David tries to get him drunk and send him home to sleep with his wife, and he still won't. So David is just, "What am I going to do?" So he has somebody write up these orders that Uriah, this general, should be sent to the front line. And he gives him this order and he makes him basically carry his own death sentence back to the war. And he gets put on the front line. And as soon as they go into their next battle, he's the first one killed. So now Bathsheba is a widow. And there's an opening for David to now marry her. And then he'll be able to legitimize this pregnancy. However, the prophet, and I'm going on, but because I'm just so into the story, the prophet Nathan says, "I know what you did, and you two are going to be punished for this." And so the baby's born, but after 7 days, it dies, and that's the punishment, and they mourn, but then they stay together and they have another child, Solomon, eventually, who becomes the next king of Israel, despite the fact that David has all sorts of older children. Bathsheba she doesn't turn into anything. She makes sure her son becomes king. Anyway, I tell the story from her point of view. There are a lot of parallels to what I just said. So a little bit of a spoiler. However, I end the story at this point where Bethsabe, my Bethsabe, has all the power and is in a position to make all the decisions about what she wants her life to be. And this guy
Very
fading off into the sunset. So there's that power dynamic and that Me Too element and that like May December relationship thing that get all involved. I've used the COVID pandemic as my war and sending someone off to an office in Asia just before the pandemic breaks out, and his situation in Hong Kong is pretty serious. So anyway, I try to really have fun with the structure of that plot. And this is
Mhm.
the first time I've really held true to the way the story's plotted out in the Bible, just because I think it's so incredible. It's like a soap opera. You wouldn't even believe that it was a scripture.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really fascinating how you drew those ties together between the past and the present. Now, I believe I would like to know more about you. I haven't actually asked like about your background because I think this is your third novel, which must mean that you also have maybe multiple careers or a career different from this, right?
Yeah, so my first novel was published when just after I turned 50, and I'm at 58 now. So I've
Wow.
been a writer all my life, however, writing short stories, and I've been an avid reader. Actually, one of the last jobs I had before I stayed home full time with my kids was being a case writer at Harvard Business School. So the students there, everything through the case study method. And that means there's a lot of research associates working for the different professors writing these situations. And I fell in love with the storytelling around that, but I also fell in love with the lifestyle. And I thought, this is something I can do that I may be able to balance with being home with my kids because my husband had a job that involved being on the road all the time. And I felt like my job up until then had been pretty stressful. And so I was thinking I could probably do this. We were raising our kids in downtown Boston, and I took advantage of pretty much every writing class and adult education opportunity that was offered. And there's so many to choose from in Boston. And I ended up taking a class that focused on writing from your own experience. And I'd write so many essays, and no matter what the prompt was, it could have been a prompt about writing about like a pair of scissors on your desk. Somehow I would end up writing about my mother. So I realized I had a lot to work out, and I probably did over 5 or 6 years writing personal essays around being an only child, being the mother, being the child of somebody who had an addiction, being really overly close to your parents. And my parents had me when they were very young, and I was very close to my grandparents. And anyway, I just love these stories of us and our generations, but I didn't want to I didn't I wanted to be able to exaggerate and enhance the facts, so I turned some things into fiction, and the inspiration for my first novel, Eden, really did come from a lot of the women in my family or different situations. And in my family, we did have a long lost sibling show up at one point. And so that was a really interesting thing that I wanted to include that dynamic. When I wrote The Nine, I was actually a mom sending her teenage children off into the world as well at boarding schools. And so I was drawing on some of the righteous indignation I felt over some of the news that was coming out about boarding schools and the mishandling of the trust. But yeah, so after the Harvard Business School job, I was doing a lot of nonprofit work. I'm actually an athlete as well and was serving as the chair of US squash. I'm a squash player, which is an obscure sport in most of the world, but not in
Mm.
New England. And I was writing, and took a long time, but got that probably took 10 years of classes and rewrites and mentorship and looking for a publishing outlet to get Eden out in the world. And yeah, once I did, I started to understand better how to structure a novel.
Mhm.
And I was really good at setting and characters, but I didn't always have the best pacing and the best plot. So I started to really understand the importance of that. And I wouldn't say writing has gotten any easier. Maybe it's gotten like the process has gotten a bit shorter. I think Eden took 10 years. During part of that time, I started writing The Nine. And so all in total, that took about 6 years. And now I started writing Daughter of a Promise in 2018, 2019. And it's been done for about a year. And that's just because of the publishing queue. And it's came out this week. So I'd gone down to 4 or 5 years. But I feel like for me, anything that I would want to have my name on out in the world for the rest of time, it needs to be something I take a lot of time with and has a certain complexity and richness to it as well.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it was coming. It came out this week. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was so excited to talk to you because I'm doing a bit less in terms of in-person events and because of my new job on the farm. And so podcasting and getting the word out to readers and writers and just to the general public over the airwaves is my MO right now.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that's really cool. Congratulations. And sorry if you hear some background noises. My dog has decided that now's the time he's gonna play with his chew toy. This is the exact moment.
I put my dog in the other room for that very reason.
And that and I usually 'cause I have a list of things and I was like, "Oh, maybe this because he was pretty knocked out. I give him some medicine because he has arthritis now." So I was like, "Oh, he'll be fine this time." Wow, not at all. So I'm curious, and the reason I asked about your background is because a lot of writers, they come from so many different places, and it's so cool to see how the different strings come about. What's funny is that you mentioned boarding school, and that's a whole world that I don't know. I grew up on the West Coast. I thought boarding school was actually fictional. When I read about it in Harry Potter, I thought, "Oh, that's so cool. It's just it." And then I find out it's a real thing later. I was like, so
Well,
everybody
I went to high yeah, I
oh,
went
go
to
ahead.
high school in Southern California, and then I went to college in New England, and I met my future husband who had gone to boarding school, and the first thing I said was like, "Oh, what'd you do? Did you steal a car? Did you, like, do a lot of drugs? Like, why'd you
Huh.
get sent to boarding school?" And so then it's pretty ironic that we raised our kids in downtown Boston, and I wasn't sending them miles and miles away. They were within driving distance, but yeah, they lived in the dorms, so it was different. And so I think that's why I was like, I'm such an outsider, and you notice a lot and you're shocked by a lot. And that's the kind of observant mind space that's great for writing a story.
I love that, and it's exactly as you said it, that's how I pictured it. I'm like, "Oh, what did you do? What did they do?" To remember, wait a second. I'm in LA right now, so the newness is very new. So I'm curious, you're talking about your writing process. I love it. You started with 10 years, now you're like more than 5 years. Please tell us, what is your writing process like? How do you even start with the idea?
I think, I gave a little bit of a clue when I related to some of these stories I've studied and how I felt the emotion that the woman may have felt. Or sometimes I find my way into a story uh, because of a feeling that I think needs more exploration. And often it has to do with like small domestic dramas, and I need to then create a plot in which to explore it. But I think I'm a visual person, and I'll go back to my first novel. The main character, who was a young woman at the turn of the 20th century, I saw this scene of her meeting this young man, and the man was she was from this high society, and the young man was like a second generation German Jewish immigrant. And I saw them at this lawn party together, and I just started writing that scene. What I really do, I use Scrivener. I don't write in order sometimes because I want to try to write every day, and every day I'm not motivated to write the next thing. I often jump around by what I see in my head and what I think is most interesting. Some days I need a little extra, and so I want to just write something new and interesting, and it's an island, and I stick it in Scrivener, and I figure out how I'm going to connect the dots later. And then sometimes I'm just like, I have the energy to just plow through, and I try to connect all the dots, and I try to connect them with scene and kind of work on what's a realistic outline. I guess one thing I'd say to writers is just, especially in the first drafting process, there's so much to love because there's so much freedom. And if you have a character or you have setting, sometimes people are really inspired by setting and you see a place in your head. It's just sitting down and describing it and using language that's fine in the first draft, but it doesn't have to be like drop dead sentences. You're getting your words down for your first draft. But I would say I'm a very visual person, and with all of my novels, I find my way in because I see my character in a situation. And I'll have to tell you, a lot of these scenes don't make it into the final book, but it gets me my little butt in my chair. And, you know, I'd say 50% of what you write gets saved, but you're not going to know which 50% it is when you're sitting down. Sometimes you think you've written something great that's going to make it all the way into the novel, and then unfortunately you end up having to cut it because it's not going to work. But yeah, I guess I either hear some dialogue, I see my character doing something, and I try to just use that sense to just write.
That's awesome. I really like how you're pushing forward. I think that reminds me of Stephen King, P. Wesley Smith. It's all about finding a trail, like following a trail, even if it doesn't make sense. Like you said, you're not always writing out of order. I'm curious, what is your revision of feedback editing cycle? What is that like?
I was so fortunate to find this organization called Grub Street in Boston, where I took a lot of classes. And with Eden, that's where I first found the value of getting workshopped and feedback. And so now I find mentors, writing groups, fellowships early and often. Like getting feedback early and often is what I do. With Daughter of a Promise, I worked on the manuscript. Um, I had some feedback in a class. COVID happened. I applied to a fellowship at Stony Brook called Stony Brook. part of the State University of New York system in Long Island. And I was accepted. And that was a year of really polishing the novel, more than polishing, really rewriting the novel. And then, yeah, so I would have to say writers need to be willing to share their work and be willing to share it even at a very early stage. That helps to make things go a little faster. I'm working on something right now with a writing group, or I'm sharing pages in a writing group of folks I met in that fellowship. And they're giving me such great ideas along the way and telling me what's really not working along the way. And it's really helping me to, they're helping me, they help generate some good ideas and they help me let go of the things that I think are interesting that nobody else thinks are interesting.
It's
But
always so helpful.
yeah, I know you're a writing coach, and I'm a big fan. That was finding the person that can read and relate to your work is such a gift. And I'm actually in another writing group here in Park City, and I'm working with one of my fellow writers on her memoir, and I feel so privileged that she's asked me to help. And it is so good for your writing to give critique. So if you are lucky enough to be part of a writing group, yes, you receive great feedback, but the ability to discern what might need to be done in someone else's work is so good for your analytical mind and your writing chops. You bring that discernment back to your own work. You might let yourself go, but you won't let someone else get away with 2 pages of something, and then you're like, "I'm doing the same thing I just told them not to do."
I love that. And there's something that you're saying that it's really interesting. You're saying that you're getting feedback early. And I've heard also the opposing thought, which is write with the door closed. And then once you're ready, you can open the door for editing. But for
Mhm.
you, what is your definition of early? I'm curious.
This might be a crazy situation because I was part of this fellowship and made these wonderful friends and these talented writers, and we started a writing group, and I really wanted to stay in the writing group, so I had to start writing a new novel, and maybe I'm just generating pages in order to share and to have friends. But I think that it's good because when you are out with a new book and promoting and life gets busy, it's easy to say, I don't have time to start something new. And the creative process is something that gives me a lot of joy. So I guess it's probably not the best advice to share as early as I'm sharing, but I'm going into these sessions with these folks with very little ego on the line because they're very aware this is a early draft. And so I'll say, I don't want line edits here. I just want, let's like the general direction in which this story is going. What do you think? These characters I'm coming up with, what do you think? And so you can always ask for a certain kind of feedback. You could be working on your novel for or your short story for 10 years and you really do want people like critiquing every sentence and then you might be at a stage where you're like I want to submit this to a magazine and people are like okay then let's get the red pen out. It's nice to be in a group where people are at all different stages and I'm going in with ideas and thoughts and these folks also have worked on Daughter of a Promise with me so they know some of my inclinations and my proclivities and my obsessions and it's it's really some of the greatest friends you'll have. They're professional friends, but they're people who know the inside of your brain better than a lot of people that you are related to or call your good friends. So that's maybe why I'm saying I like to share early, but I think it's really helping me. And I do think it's also because each book's been a little bit different in terms of my approach. But back in the day before COVID, I worked on the 9 and got those chapters workshopped live and in person and in class as often as I could. So, yeah, you just have to be willing to go naked in front of people and be willing to take whatever they have to say.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. Being naked in front of people. Now, I do have a question before I actually dive into that. Or not a question, more of a statement. I agree with you. I feel like getting feedback early has been really helpful for me because if I'm all by myself tackling a book, I'm so inside my head, I can see all the flaws. And you're like, oh, this is not working. This is not working. I don't know. And then for me, that negativity starts the self doubt. So one of my writing groups that we're really like much, much closer. It's those friends that you're like, okay, now you guys are my friends. This is a friend group. They're so supportive, and I'm starting from the beginning. Here's my ideas, and they're doing the same thing. They're like, "Oh, what about this? Oh, like going in this direction," and it's been super helpful. And I've written more now so much quickly than ever have in the past. I feel like I'm totally on the train that you're on. That train, I'm on that
Yeah.
train.
Yeah, it's such a joy. You and I are similar in that it's not like the nervousness of a first time author where you are very protective and you don't really want to share until you think it's good enough to share. I would advise that nobody should really feel that way, but once you've been have had some work out in the world a little bit, yeah, then you know the benefit of just give it to me now. I'm going to get it eventually. Give it to me before I've written 200,000 words going in the wrong direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it was gonna lead us to the next question, which is going back to saying, "All right, here I am, I'm naked, y'all give it to me." So it sounds like you had that self-doubt previously, that nervousness. At what point was it a specific moment that it changed for you? Was it a series of moments that you're like, "You know what? I better start now."
My family lived in Europe for my husband's job for about 2 years, and that gave me a chance to really finish up this Eden manuscript. And when I came back to the United States, I thought I had the hottest ticket in town, and this thing was gonna be like there was gonna be a bidding war over it, and I was just ready for fame and fortune. I'm kidding, but I got involved with Grub Street, and I hired, like you, a coach, a manuscript consultant, someone to give it a read. And what she said was that she loved my writing, she loved my characters, but this book was just not too much interiority and, no plot, and it was too long and too slow. And but the way she said, "I love your writing and I love these characters," that was all it took for me. So, I think once if someone had said, "You can't even put a sentence together, like, this probably isn't for you," it's not what she said. She really gave me the positive and then told me what wasn't working. And, what wasn't working was stuff you could learn. And so and I think anybody can learn to write well. For some people, the prose flows more easily, but that first part of writing good sentences, having good turns of phrase, having elegant vocabulary, I felt confident that I had that. But the rest of the stuff I knew I needed to go to school on it. And it's not even going to school. It's like dissecting every book you love and figuring out how the author makes it seem so easy and how the chapters are structured. So I guess I was willing to be naked because I knew it wasn't like someone was saying it's a helpless cause. It was more the mechanics of what I needed to know. I just didn't know it yet.
Yeah, I that's really cool, and I have to agree with you. With one of the things I say in the podcast is that everyone can learn how to write. It's a skill that can be learned. So I'm really glad that you're saying that as well. I have a question about your process in publishing. Can you tell me you have your publisher is She Writes Press. Can you tell me more about how you got about getting into their circle and what was that process like for you?
Sure. So with Eden, I went to Grub Street's annual writers conference called Muse in the Marketplace, where you have the opportunity to meet folks in the publishing world, both agents and editors. And I met an agent there who called herself a literary change agent. And she described to me not only is there traditional publishing out there, but there are other alternatives that are on the scene now, such as She Writes Press, which is a hybrid publisher. So it's a model where the author and the publishing company are partners in a way. I didn't get a big advance. I didn't get any advance. I had to invest in my inventory and in the project. She Writes Press invested a lot in the project as well, but that means that what's a traditional royalty is different. So I get a much bigger share of every book sale. The other thing that really was wonderful when I learned more about this is the amount of control I would have over my release date, over owning my rights, and how I we call ourselves authorpreneurs. In a way, we're entrepreneurs and authors, but we I like the business side of this and I found it really interesting. With Eden, I had worked on it for such a long time and I was having less success with the traditional world. And I thought, I believe in this book. I think this book is great. And I can have control over when it comes out and I can get this career started because I had another book that I was working on and I was excited to get that out as well. I guess I got a lot of positive reinforcement because Eden really sold well and we sold the audio rights and the foreign rights and Germany and France twice. And I made back a lot of money on Eden. The nine did incredibly well. And then COVID hit and it wasn't really the time or place to continue to promote it, but still, it sold a lot more than most books do. Coming out of my fellowship with Daughter of a Promise, I thought this is my breakout moment. Maybe I will get an agent and, a different agent. The agent who introduced me to She Writes Press, she and I very amicably parted ways, but I thought the fellowship would be the breakout moment. And again, I just don't think for whatever reason, this book, people were interested. I got a lot of agents reading the full manuscript. But at the end of the day, I don't know if it was me. I don't know if it was my age. I don't know what it had to do with, but I'm just accepting it's not my turn. It's traditional publishing. And I do believe in myself. And I really wanted this book out in the world. And I was thrilled when I got a 5-star Kirkus review. I felt very vindicated and have continued to get a lot of the book's getting a lot of great receptions. There was something that this first agent said to me that was very wise, and it was, "You have to decide what your goals are and what does success look like to you?" And getting my creating art and having readers hold it and read it and connecting with them, that to me is success. A lot of the other stuff is very ego oriented. And in the literary circles that I sometimes travel in, people can judge me and be dismissive. But I get emails from readers all the time. I am invited to book clubs all the time. I get to talk to people like you. And I don't know. I feel like it's this connection that I'm more turned on about than the other stuff. So, you know, and then again, I'm 58. So if I was 30 and this was my career and I really needed to validate it with this publishing deal and this literary award, that would be one thing. I'm so happy that I have the time to do this and that I'm connecting with people in the way that I am and sharing my thoughts that seem to be connecting with others. So it's great.
Yeah. And it's so timely that you're talking about that because that's something that I've been exploring in my own, which is disconnecting those external factors of that, say, success, putting on quotation marks, everyone who's not watching that, and instead saying, actually having art, connecting with people, making them feel like you're not alone. We have a story connection here. Oh, I love that. And I think it's beautiful. That's what you're pursuing because I think everything else, what is it? It puts those headphones on your art, muffles things,
Yeah.
makes it a little bit
Yeah.
less bright. Well, we're almost out of time here, which I mean, this conversation has been going so fast for me. But I do want to ask one question before we talk about where people can find you. What was maybe, or what are the hardest things about writing a book and how do you overcome
Uh, let's see. Writing a book it's the most inefficient thing in the world. If you're the type of person who likes to check things off a list and get done, it's really the opposite of that. Let's see. The hardest thing, not just about writing a book, but creating art, and especially something like a novel that takes so long. There's a certain amount of fear of being rejected and being dismissed. I think that's one of the first things you have to let go of. We talked a little bit of letting go of your ego, but I guess during the revision process, you have to be willing to like completely rewrite things. With Daughter of a Promise, I was challenged that getting into the story just didn't feel natural. Why is it important for Betsabe to be telling this story? Like, why now? Why? What's so urgent? And I had this idea that she should be writing this whole book as a letter to her unborn son. And she should be writing it in the future with a retrospective voice of a woman who is a little bit wiser and had learned her lessons about that year. So I went back and I rewrote the whole thing as a letter in a new voice, like going back and forth between when she was young, but and when she was wise, older and wiser. But like you have to just be willing to rewrite, and you really never know when it's going to be over. So somebody once said the hardest thing about writing a novel is being able to surrender to the process. You're really not in charge. You just have to keep listening for what this work wants to be. And that's why the writing groups are helpful. Sometimes people can help you see before you see it what this work wants to be. But it's like getting out of your own way.
That was beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. So, where can people find you, find your work? And are you working on anything next? You said you are already. Is there any hints to that? Or is that still like a secret project right now?
No, I'm working on it. I'm not entirely in love with it the way it exists right now, but I had a minor character in Daughter of a Promise who deserves her own book. So I'm trying to write one for her. And yeah, I told you that I've got this new life and interest in agriculture in Wisconsin. So I think that farm life in some way is going to find its way into this next book. But Find Me is, before I go off on another tangent, I have a pretty up to date website, which is jeanblasberg.com. And there's all sorts of links to all three of my books, both to buy them and to learn more about them and book club questions. I'm also very active on Instagram. So I'm Jean Blasberg author on Instagram, same handle on Facebook. I'd say those are my two main social media platforms. And I also write a monthly, maybe, yeah, monthly newsletter on Substack. So I'm Jean
Oh,
Blasberg
that's
on Substack if you want to follow me there as well.
nice. I'm also like getting into Substack. It's very cool, very awesome place. And your website is really neat. I very cool vibe. Love it. Thank
We've
you
done these
so
fun trailers for the book. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. We've done these fun trailers for the book, which the video, bringing it to life with video is really fun.
that was cool. Your characters everywhere on the page, and I love that. It felt, oh, that's her. That's Betsabe, right? So that's
Yep.
awesome. This has been super amazing. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to chatting with you on your next work. Cool stuff. This has been Jeanne Blasberg, who has written 3 books, and we can't wait to see what's next. A Daughter of a Promise is out this week. And Jeannie from the How to Write a Book podcast. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it.
Thanks for listening to the How to Write a Book podcast. I'm your host, Massiel, your book coach and editor, cheering you on in your writing journey. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. For more inspiration and resources, visit howtowriteabookpodcast.com. Until next time, keep your passion alive and your pen moving.